Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm Randy Borscheit from the Alliance for the Arts, and we're very proud because this afternoon marks the new beginning of the Arts Forum at the New York Times, which is a lecture series that we conceived as a way of introducing the people who are at the head of some of the most important and interesting cultural institutions in the city, in the nation, in the world, and to give them an opportunity to describe their vision of their organizations when they're still fairly early on in their time. And so we're enormously pleased to have Tom Campbell here. He will talk to you about the museum and his vision for its future. But it's very nice to remember that not only is this a flagship cultural institution in New York, the largest tourist attraction and a truly encyclopedic museum, but it's heartening to be reminded that this was the Metropolitan Museum placed in the Central Park. It has a very special part in New York's cultural history and New York's cultural future. Times has a certain role in all of this too, and so I'd like warmly to thank our friends at the New York Times for allowing us to gather here and being our host. If you go back to the 19th century, to the establishment of the Metropolitan and its building in Central Park, it represented really a brilliant partnership between that private institution and the city of New York. And we're very fortunate that not only that model was copied by many other institutions, but that it thrives and flourishes today. And one of the reasons for that is that we have at the head of our Cultural Affairs Department a very enlightened, very passionate and committed commissioner. I'd like to introduce Kate Levin, Commissioner of Cultural Affairs.
Well, thank you so much, Randy, and thank you for having me here. And thanks very much to the New York Times for helping to revive what really is a very important convening for cultural leaders and thinkers and fans in the city of New York. When I first heard of Tom's appointment, I was extremely excited. As Randy says, the city of New York has a crucial, and we'd like to think constructive role to play with regard to the Metropolitan Museum, and among my many honors is to be Tom's landlord. And I have had the privilege in my years on this job of working with the fabulous leadership of that institution, including President Emily Rafferty. So I was thrilled to see that they had chosen a man after my own heart, someone who spent serious imaginative time thinking about Henry VIII and England in the early 16th century, and probably the only other person in this room who knows that our word sleazy comes from English cloth merchants' fight with Silesian merchants in around the same period, an early Polish joke. So it's very exciting for me, and I thought how great of the Met's trustees to, really support diversity by moving from the French accent to the English accent. But seriously, it is a meaningful, symbolic moment, I think, for a lot of us, and represents a generational change. And it's particularly poignant to think about that in light of Tom Hoving's passing. And I think there is a generational divide that a lot of us in the cultural community are always thinking about and alert to. And I thought about the article that I read in The Guardian about Tom's ascension, that talked about how he had been making the decision to put his hat in the ring while listening to a song by the rock group Pendulum. And I thought back to what Philippe had told me, 30 years earlier when he decided to go for the job, and he was listening to a song by the Doobie Brothers. And I thought, plus ça change, plus it's the same damn thing all over again. But very seriously, I think we are in a field that is constantly wrestling with our obligation and adoration of the past at the same time that we desperately want to make everything new right now. And I was struck by Ben Brantley's praise for the current production of Streetcar, and it ran in a newspaper, and I just don't remember the name of the newspaper. But anyways, his highest praise for that production was it was as if the play had never been performed before. And that's an extraordinary pressure I think everybody in this field faces, but particularly those who steward museums, which are literally full of physical artifacts from the past which have to be safeguarded, and at the same time that they have to be interpreted anew for every single visitor who walks through the door. And at the center of that challenge is Tom as the Met's new director. And because he heads the largest museum in this country, he is de facto the leader for so many of us in trying to grapple with that challenge and figuring out how it is that in a society as concerned as we seem to be with things up to the minute. I can barely see you all, but I'm sure some of you are on Blackberries and twittering or tweeting or whatever away at the moment. How is it that we really do learn to embrace our past, understand our present, and think constructive thoughts about our future? Because that ultimately is the job that cultural institutions play in our society. And I have to tell you, in the time that I've had the privilege to get to know him, Tom is absolutely the perfect person for this task. He is expert, he is eloquent, he is able to adapt to new sartorial norms. He's cast off his nappy corduroys for incredibly natty suits. He is visionary, he is passionate, and so thoughtful and interesting on the subject of museums' obligation and opportunities to create themselves for their audiences, to meet those audiences, to embrace those audiences, that I am enormously excited to get to work with him. And it is a great pleasure for me now to introduce to you Tom Campbell.